The parking garage at Harmon and Wiles smells like exhaust and fluorescent light. I know that doesn't make sense. Light doesn't have a smell. But if it did, it would smell exactly like the third floor of that garage on a Wednesday morning in February, when the heating vents push stale air across the concrete, and every footstep echoes longer than it should. I'd been at the firm for 11 months, long enough to stop getting lost between the 32nd floor and the records room, not long enough to feel like I belonged there. That Wednesday I was running exactly 4 minutes behind, which sounds minor until you understand that my supervising partner, I'll call him my boss, because that's what he was, whatever the org chart said, had a specific and documented intolerance for lateness that he applied selectively and always to junior associates, never to himself. I'd watched him stroll in at 10:20 on a Tuesday and say nothing. I'd watched him cut someone off mid-sentence in a status meeting because she'd arrived at 8:33 instead of 8:30. The math wasn't hard, so I was moving fast, laptop bag on one shoulder, coffee thermos in my hand, keys still out because I hadn't found a pocket yet, and I was not in the mood for anything that was going to slow me down. The elevator bank in the garage has 2 elevators. One of them has been out of service intermittently for as long as I'd worked there. That morning both doors were closed and neither button was lit, which meant both were already in use or stuck somewhere above me, and I was going to have to wait. I stepped to the side to look for the stairwell door, and that's when I saw him. He was standing at the parking meter kiosk near the elevator bay. The kind of kiosk that takes credit cards and prints a validation sticker, the one tenants use if they have visitors or if they forget to register their own plate. He was maybe 70, maybe older, wearing a dark coat that had been good once and was now just clean. He was pressing buttons, stopping, pressing again. His shoulders had that particular set to them, not defeated exactly, but close. I almost kept walking. I want to be honest about that. The stairwell door was right there and I was 4 minutes behind and I had a 9 a.m. that my boss was running and I knew better than to walk in after him. But I slowed down. I don't know why, except that I've seen that particular posture before, on my grandfather in a CVS once, trying to work the new self-checkout, too proud to ask for help, and something about it just reached through my chest and grabbed. I said, "Do you need a hand with that?" He looked up. He had one of those faces that's hard to read, not unfriendly, but careful, like he'd learned to be careful. "The machine won't take my card," he said. I looked at the screen. It was showing an error I recognized. The guest validation system had a glitch where it wouldn't process certain older card formats, and the building management had sent a memo about it 3 months ago that I'd read once and forgotten. The workaround was to pay cash at the main kiosk downstairs, which this man clearly didn't know. "It's the machine," I said. "It does this. How much do you need?" He told me 2 hours, which was $6. I found my wallet. I had a 10. I put it in. "You don't have to do that," he said. "It's $6, I said. I took the validation sticker when it printed and handed it to him. "Put this on your dashboard before you leave." He said thank you in the way that some older men say thank you, looking at you directly, like it means something. Not effusive, just real. I took the stairs. I was 2 minutes late. My boss looked at his watch when I walked in and didn't say anything, which was almost worse than if he had. The thing about working at a firm like Harmon and Weil is that it operates on a kind of pressure that you stop noticing after a while. The way you stop noticing the sound of traffic if you live near a highway long enough. It's not that the pressure goes away. It's that your baseline shifts. You forget what quiet felt like. I'd been there 11 months, and my baseline had shifted considerably. My job technically was junior associate in corporate transactions. What that meant in practice was that I drafted documents that senior associates reviewed, attended meetings where I was not expected to speak unless spoken to, and spent a significant portion of my working hours in a state of low-grade dread about whether I'd missed something in a contract that would matter later. The answer was usually no. The dread didn't care. That Wednesday was a closing day for a deal I'd been supporting for 2 months. Closing days are their own specific kind of chaos. Documents going back and forth, signatures needed from people in 3 different time zones, The particular tension of knowing that if something falls apart, the question of whose fault it is will be answered quickly and the answer would travel fast. My boss was in a mood. He was often in a mood on closing days, but this one was particular. He'd found a discrepancy in a schedule I prepared, a minor one, corrected the same morning, caught before it reached the client, and he'd chosen to address it in front of 4 other people in a glass-walled conference room where anyone walking past could see, though not hear. I stood there while he talked. I kept my face level. I said, "You're right, I should have caught that," which was true, and it's been corrected, which was also true, and I did not say any of the other things I was thinking. After, I went to the bathroom on the floor no one really uses, the 31st, between a storage room and an IT closet, and I sat on the counter for a few minutes and looked at the ceiling. My hands were doing the shaking thing they sometimes do when I've held tension in them too long. This is the part no one tells you about working in a place like that. Not the hours, not the pressure, not even the way some people treat you. It's the specific loneliness of not being able to say out loud to anyone in the building, "This is hard and I'm tired and I don't know if I made a mistake coming here." You just go back to your desk, you keep working. You eat lunch at your computer and you track your billable hours and you tell yourself this is temporary. This is what the first year is supposed to feel like. You will look back on this and it will have been worth something. I went back to my desk. The closing finished at 7:40 p.m. My boss said, "Good work, team," to the room and left without looking at me specifically. I took the elevator down to the garage alone. I didn't think about the man in the parking garage after that. That probably sounds cold, but I don't mean it that way. I thought about him the way you think about most things you do on instinct, briefly in the moment, and then it moves to the back of everything else. It was $6.02. I didn't do it expecting anything. The next few weeks were the same as the weeks before them. I drafted things. I sat in meetings. I learned the hard way that my boss and the head of the corporate group had a long-standing territorial dispute that had nothing to do with me, but would occasionally land on me anyway the way weather does. I started keeping a notebook, not because anyone suggested it, but because I was losing track of small things, and the small things were starting to matter. The parking garage continued to have one working elevator most mornings. Then, on a Thursday, about 3 weeks after the Wednesday, I'd given up $10 and expected nothing back. My supervisor's assistant stopped by my desk at 4:15 in the afternoon and said that the managing partner wanted to see me at 4:30. The managing partner was a woman named, I'll call her what everyone called her, which was simply the managing partner, or occasionally just her last name spoken in a particular tone. She'd been at the firm for over 30 years. She had the corner office on 32 that looked east, and I had been in it exactly once, during orientation, when 15 of us had been ushered in for a 20-minute welcome that she delivered with the warmth of someone who had delivered it many times and still meant it. I did not know why she wanted to see me. I thought first about the closing, the discrepancy, whether something had surfaced after the fact. I went through everything I could remember fast. The way you go through your morning when you realize you left something at home and you're trying to figure out what. I couldn't think of anything that would rise to the level of the managing partner. I knocked at 4:29. "Come in." She was at her desk. There was someone else in the room, a man, seated in one of the 2 chairs across from her, his back to me. I registered him the way you register peripheral details when you're nervous, coat draped over the chair arm, silver hair, something familiar about the angle of his shoulders. She said my name. She said, "I'd like you to meet someone." He turned around. It was the man from the parking garage. I don't know what my face did. I hope it did nothing visible, but I'm honestly not sure. "This is Arthur Pemberton," she said. "He's on the board of the Whitmore Foundation. We've been in conversation with them about a pro bono partnership for the better part of a year." She paused. "He tells me you met a few weeks ago." I looked at him. He was looking at me with the same careful expression from the garage. Not smiling exactly, but something near it. "The parking kiosk," I said. The parking kiosk, he agreed. The Whitmore Foundation, I would learn later, was a significant institution, not a household name, but the kind of organization that did serious work in housing and education policy, the kind that a firm like Harman and Weil would genuinely want to be associated with, for reasons that were partly good and partly strategic, the way most good things in that world were. Arthur Pemberton had been coming in that morning for a preliminary meeting. He'd gotten there early and had the kiosk problem, and he'd figured he'd deal with it. And he hadn't realized the elevator had taken him to the wrong level, and by the time I'd found him, he'd been standing there for 7 minutes. He'd mentioned the incident to the managing partner, apparently, not as an anecdote, not as a point in favor of me specifically, more as an observation about the firm, something about the way the junior associate had handled it. Her words, from what he'd told her, stuck with him as a data point about the culture here. She didn't say all of this in the meeting. I learned it in pieces later. What she said in the meeting was this: "We're putting together a small team for the Whitmore engagement. I'd like you on it." I said I'd be glad to. Arthur Pemberton said, "The coffee was decent, by the way, wherever you'd gotten it." I had no memory of bringing coffee. Apparently, I'd had my thermos. I didn't know what to do with any of this, so I just said, "I'm glad." The managing partner looked at me for a moment. Actually looked the way she hadn't in orientation, and then she said something I've thought about since. She said, "People show you who they are when they think it doesn't count." She wasn't saying it to me specifically. She was saying it the way people say things that have become true to them over a long time. But I heard it the way you hear things when you're 29 and tired and have been holding tension in your hands and trying to figure out if you're in the right place. I heard it like something I needed. I didn't get a promotion. I want to be clear about that, because I think the version of the story that feels satisfying has a neater ending, and the actual version is more sideways than that. What happened was, I joined the Whitmore team. It was different work than what I'd been doing, more external-facing, more relationship-driven, less of the document review grind that had become my default state. I was still junior, I still made mistakes. My boss still had his moods, though he wasn't on the Whitmore engagement, which meant I had 4 months of working on something without the specific weight of his attention. Arthur Pemberton came into the office several more times over those months. He was not warm exactly, that wasn't his register, but he was consistent. He remembered details. He asked questions that showed he'd been listening the last time. He had the particular quality of some older people who have done serious things and no longer feel they need to perform seriousness, which made him easier to talk to than many people much younger. Once, coming down in the elevator together, he asked me how I was finding the work. I said the honest thing, which was that I was finding it harder than I'd expected and more interesting than I'd expected, and that I wasn't sure yet if that was a good combination or a confusing one. He said, "It's usually both." I didn't have anything to add to that, so we rode the rest of the way down in silence, which was fine. I still work at Harman and Weil. Different role now. Though the change came gradually and not from any single moment. I still keep the notebook habit, though what I use it for has shifted. Less frantic tracking, more of the kind of writing that helps you think. My boss and I have a professional relationship that I would describe as functional. I learn something over time about how to work around the parts of him that aren't useful and to pay attention to the parts that are. That's not the same as liking him, but it turned out to be more valuable than the alternative. The Whitmore engagement is still ongoing. It became something the firm actually cares about, which is rarer than it sounds and which I try not to take for granted. I think about that Wednesday morning sometimes. 4 minutes behind, thermos in hand, stairwell or elevator, the particular set of a stranger's shoulders, $6 and a validation sticker. The way I almost kept walking. I almost kept walking. I'm not trying to make this a story about fate or about the universe keeping score. I don't really believe it works that way, and even if it did, that's a bad reason to do something decent. The man in the parking garage might have been no one. He might have been a retired school teacher or someone's grandfather, or just a person who needed to get their car validated and had the bad luck of a machine that didn't work. It still would have been the right thing to give him $6. What I know is this. The managing partner was right that people show you who they are when they think it doesn't count. I know this because I've watched it happen in both directions. I've watched people be small in moments they thought were invisible, and I've seen what that does to the room when it turns out they weren't. I try to be the same person in the elevator as I am in the conference room. I try to be the same person at 4:15 on a Thursday when someone's case feels smaller than mine as I am at 9 a.m. when everything is visible. I don't always manage it. But I know what I'm trying for. There's a new group of junior associates on 32 now. I can tell them apart from how they move in the hallways. Fast, purposeful, slightly too aware of who's watching. I recognize it. I remember it. When I see one of them looking lost, I try to slow down. Not because anyone will notice. Not because it will count toward anything. Just because it costs almost nothing, and I know now what it feels like on the other side. I've turned that Wednesday over in my mind more times than makes sense for something that took maybe 90 seconds. $6. A validation sticker. A stranger with his coat collar up and his shoulders set in a way I recognized from somewhere older and more personal than that garage. I almost didn't stop. I want to keep saying that because I think it's the most important part. Not what I did, but how close I came to not doing it. That's the thing nobody talks about when they tell stories like this. The decision isn't dramatic. It doesn't feel like a crossroads. It feels like a small inconvenience that you can easily justify walking past. 4 minutes behind, boss already in the room, stairwell door right there. Every practical reason pointed in the other direction. And still something in me slowed down. I don't think the universe was watching. I don't think I was being tested or that some invisible ledger recorded what I did and arranged for Arthur Pemberton to be sitting in that office as a consequence. I genuinely don't believe it works that way, and I think believing it works that way actually misses the point. The point is that what you do when no one is watching, when it genuinely doesn't count, when there's no audience and no record and no version of events where this moment matters, that's not separate from who you are. That is who you are. The managing partner said it better than I could. People show you who they are when they think it doesn't count. I heard that and felt it land somewhere deep because I'd spent 11 months in that building trying to perform competence and professionalism in every visible moment. And it turned out the moment that mattered most was one I'd already forgotten by the time I got to my desk. There's a word I keep coming back to, and it's integrity, though I know it sounds old-fashioned. Not integrity in the sense of following rules or passing tests. Integrity in the literal sense. The way a structure has integrity when it holds the same shape under pressure as it does at rest. When the weight comes off, it doesn't warp. It stays true to itself. I was under a lot of pressure that year. I was tired and uncertain and spending too much of my energy managing how I appeared to people who had power over my career. That's not a character flaw, that's just a junior associate in a large firm in her first year. But it meant that most of my decisions were calculated. Most of them had an audience in mind, even if that audience was just the future version of me hoping not to regret something. The parking garage had no audience. Just a stranger and a broken machine and $6. What I've come to believe, not because of anything mystical, but because I watched enough people long enough to see the pattern, is that who you are in the small moments accumulates. It compounds. The person who is decent when it costs nothing consistently over time is the person others describe as trustworthy before they can even articulate why. Arthur Pemberton couldn't have told you exactly what he saw in that garage, but something registered. Something about the way I handled a minor inconvenience that had nothing to do with me told him something about how I'd handle the things that did. That's the lesson I carry. Not be kind because it'll pay off. That's the wrong frame, and it produces the wrong behavior. Be the same person in the elevator as you are in the conference room. Be the same person at 4:15 on a slow Thursday as you are in the closing meeting everyone's watching. Not because it counts, because that consistency over time is the only thing that's actually yours.